The October wind in Boston carried a faint trace of sea salt gliding through cobblestone streets, like wrapping the whole city in an invisible coat. At 3 in the morning, my hair was damp with sweat beneath my surgical cap, and red grooves marked my palms from latex gloves worn too long. Helen Martinez, ICU nurse at Mass General, had just finished a 16-hour shift. The beeping of monitors still echoed in my ears, persistent as a looping song. Stepping through the revolving doors, I inhaled deeply. The icy air burned my lungs, but cleared my head for a rare moment of calm. My old Civic was parked at the far end near Longfellow Bridge. The engine sputtered, the temperature needle creeping upward, as if sighing under the strain. "Come on, you can do it," I murmured, stroking the steering wheel like a stubborn child. On my phone screen was Ava's face, my 4-year-old daughter grinning with one missing baby tooth. Her innocent eyes soft enough to melt an entire city, Mrs. Watterson, the older woman living downstairs, always stayed up late on my night shifts, making cocoa and reading to Ava. 15 more minutes. I calculated 15 minutes home to Cambridge if the car cooperated. The temperature gauge suddenly spiked into the red. A thin white wisp curled under the hood, thickening into a slight fog. I pulled over to the curb. Boston was quieter than usual. Only the pale streetlights struggled to keep the darkness from swallowing the Charles River. 7% battery left on my phone. I tried calling roadside assistance, but the line was busy. Then came the warning beep of a dying phone. Up ahead on Beacon Hill, golden lights spilled from the windows of stately townhouses. One stood out square, elegant, glowing like a vintage music box. "Where there's light, there's someone awake," my mother used to say. I zipped my jacket, locked the car, and hurried toward the light. The sidewalk sloped gently. My heels tapped like quick punctuation marks across the page of the night. The townhouse door had a gleaming brass handle and a misted glass panel. I raised my hand and knocked 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. A heartbeat later, a voice answered from inside, low, firm, cutting through the quiet like an overture trimmed of its prelude. "Coming." The door opened. The man standing before me was tall. The black wool coat hugged his frame like bark to a tree. Dark tousled hair. Gray-blue eyes the color of the sea off Nantucket before a storm. Not a conventionally handsome face, but one that looked lived in, as though it had learned to stand steady in the wind. "Do you need help?" His tone dropped softly at the end, polite, distant, an invitation with boundaries. I found myself staring at his hands, clean, strong-boned, the hands of a man who signed large numbers and knew how to button someone's coat. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," I said, catching my breath. "My car overheated by the bridge. My phone's dying. I need to make a quick call to tell the sitter I'll be late." He tilted his head, his eyes flicking over my still wrinkled scrubs. "I see you." "Yes. Come in. It's freezing out here." I hesitated. Single mother, middle-of-the-night stranger's house, but he stepped aside, revealing a warmly lit interior, oak floors, black and white photographs, an open kitchen with a vase of white tulips still beaded with water. Nothing chaotic, only order, as if everything had found its rightful place. I stepped in. A faint scent of bergamot brushed past me. At the dining table sat 2 open laptop screens full of charts. A short-haired woman in a gray suit looked up sharp as a freshly honed blade. "Christian?" she asked quietly, eyes sweeping over me like a marble rolling across glass. "She needs to make a call," the man said. Then he turned to me. "I'm Christian Lewis." He said it plainly without show. Yet the name struck my ear like a musical note I half remembered. From a financial headline on the hospital TV, something about mergers and billions. "Helen," I replied. "Helen Martinez." I didn't offer my hand. It was cold and dry from sanitizer. He nodded, slightly understanding, and handed me a slim black phone. "Use this, private line." No call log, private line. No call log. I swallowed. In the ICU, we lived by transparency. But at that hour, a working phone felt like salvation. I dialed Mrs. Watterson. Her sleepy voice answered, and relief wrapped my chest like a warm quilt. "My car broke down, Mrs. Watterson. I'll be a bit late." "Is Ava asleep?" "She's out like a full-bellied kitten," she chuckled. "Don't worry, dear. Stay warm." I handed the phone back. The woman in the suit closed her laptop and looked at Christian. "We'll pause. Resume at 5 with the proxy votes. I'll head to the office. Need me to leave a driver?" "No," he said, eyes returning to me softer now, like music shifting key without losing rhythm. "Miss Helen, where's your car?" "By the bridge. I'll call a tow. And I'll drive you home. Paparazzi are prowling around Beacon Hill tonight. You shouldn't be alone outside." He said it casually, but the word paparazzi froze me. That's when I realized why his name sounded familiar, the article about the billionaire who hates being photographed holding an umbrella. The angled photo that the nurses had gossiped over last week. "That's not necessary," I blurted. "I can call a rideshare. You're busy." The woman smirked faintly. "He's always busy." She shook my hand briskly. "Naomi Park. Attorney. Pleasure to meet you, Helen." Then she left. The door closed with a soft click, a tidy period at the end of a sentence. Silence lingered just long enough for me to hear my own pulse. Christian handed me a light wool coat. "Put this on. You'll be cold." He didn't ask, but he didn't command either. I slipped it on. The fabric against my skin felt like a warm palm resting on my shoulder. "Thank you," I whispered. We stepped outside. Boston before dawn always felt like a theater before rehearsal lampposts, as the orchestra sloped streets as the Tiers and the Charles River as the dark orchestra pit where the wind practiced. He unlocked a sleek black SUV. I sat in the passenger seat fastening my belt, trying to hide my trembling hands. "Do you often work nights?" he asked as we glided away, the car smooth as if floating. "When we're short-staffed, I smile. In the ICU, being short-staffed is a permanent condition." "And your daughter?" "Ava." "Right." He remembered. I nodded. "A lovely old lady watches her. I hate missing her mornings, but tonight," I stopped myself. He didn't press, only slowed as the bridge came into view. The tow truck's blue lights flashed ahead. Christian parked behind my smoking Civic, stepped out first, and spoke to the driver calmly, a few clear words. No fuss. When he returned, he opened my door, eyes flicking to an oil streak on the pavement. Nothing escaped him. "They'll take it to my partner's garage in the morning. I told them to check it, and there was no charge." "That's unnecessary," I said too quickly, my voice a little sharp. "I'll pay, of course. You'll pay by having peanut butter toast with me tomorrow morning," he said lightly, barely smiling. "I don't like owing nurses favors." The line made me laugh, a small, real laugh. "Fine, I'll owe you toast." We turned a corner, and the first twist of the night arrived. A white sedan screeched to a stop before us. Flashlights exploded 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blinding bursts. I instinctively raised my hand. Christian leaned toward me, one long hand pressing gently on my shoulder, firm, but not forceful. "Stay down," he murmured. Outside, voices shouted, flinging barbed questions like stones. "Christian, who's she new girlfriend?" "The backdoor nurse." Christian laughed not pleasantly and raised the window. The world outside dimmed into silence, sealed like a fishbowl. He drove on smooth again, leaving the chaos behind. My heart pounded harder than during any code blue. They thought I couldn't finish. Reporters believe whatever makes a story. Tonight they needed one, he said evenly. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this." I almost told him, "You didn't drag me in. I knocked on your door." But that apology from a man so obviously in control felt rare and sincere. "You're that Christian Lewis, right? Lewis Horizon Group?" He nodded slightly. "There's a major shareholders meeting tomorrow. Some people would rather I fail." Why, I asked before I could stop myself. "Because I plan to reopen the books on an old fund." He said, voice steady, more like placing a chess piece than flipping the board. "And some won't like transparency." The phrase old fund struck me like a pebble dropped into still water. My mind flashed to my mother's hospital bills, the whispered rumors of a charity fund that vanished. "I don't really understand your world," I said softly, "but reopening records usually helps the patients." I smiled. Sorry I compare everything to patients. And that he replied is precisely why I owe you that toast. You bring things back to where they belong. We reached my red brick apartment where Ava slept. Christian parked and switched off the engine. I hesitated. The night was too peaceful to end. "Thank you," I said. "For the coat?" The call and don't laugh for shielding me from the flashes. I'm not laughing, he said, eyes glinting with quiet amusement and just thinking about something small. What's that? That by morning you might become someone's story. And I don't want you to lose the right to define yourself. He pulled an envelope from the glove compartment. Not money, but a paper marked with the Lewis Horizon logo. Temporary confidentiality agreement aimed ours. If you agree, sign this. It protects you at least from having your words twisted. My legal team will handle anyone who tries. I looked at the paper feeling both grateful and wary, like being handed an umbrella in the rain, but fearing dependence. Can I show it to Mrs. Watterson first? She used to be a teacher. She loves reading fine print. Of course. He set a pen beside it. And if you'd rather not tear it up. I still owe you toast. I laughed. You really like peanut butter, huh? Not really, he said with mock seriousness. I like keeping promises. We sat in companionable silence for a beat. I opened the door. The cold air rushed in, whispering that dawn was near. I turned back to say goodbye, but a light flicked on in the third-floor window. A small figure appeared. Ava hair-tousled chin on the sill. I waved. She waved back, then unexpectedly formed a heart with her fingers. She's having sweet dreams tonight, I murmured, smiling without thinking of who sat beside me. Good Christian said his tone like a quiet checkmark in invisible ink. Go on up. I'll wait until you're inside. You don't have to. Paparazzi are still circling. I'll wait. No embellishment needed. I nodded, clutching the envelope, and hurried up the steps. At the landing, I turned. His car still sat there, lights off his silhouette, steady a small buoy in the river of night. Inside, the scent of Mrs. Watterson's cocoa, mixed with Ava's shampoo, the most comforting fragrance in the world. I set the envelope on the table, fingers brushing its edge cold and smooth, like the surface of a lake before the first stone drops. The words "Old Fund Open Books" and "Define Yourself" echoed faintly in my head. That night, I knew I had knocked on the wrong door. But as I lay down his wool coat still warm on my shoulders, I realized some wrong doors lead precisely toward the light. If this first night between Helen and Christian moved you, stay tuned for part 2, where the old fund opens and a long-buried secret awakens. Subscribe or follow so you won't miss what happens next. Tell me in the comments what you think the next twist will be. Morning in Boston opened with autumn's cold light, clear but not warm. I brewed coffee. Its gentle bitterness rose and mingled with the damp wood smell of the old apartment Ava and I call home. We ate breakfast while the radio played. The news droned on about lawsuits, stock prices, and a contentious shareholders meeting at Lewis Horizon Group. I had no reason to pay attention until they said Christian Lewis. I looked up at the little screen mounted on the fridge. His face appeared amid reporters and flashing bulbs, the same calm smile as last night. Except now he wore a charcoal suit and wasn't shielding anyone with an umbrella. It struck me then last night when I knocked on the wrong door, I had stepped into the story of a man the whole country was talking about. 3 hours later, the hospital swept me back into its daily current. Surgeries, medications, charts, patients. Every time I started to forget the name, Lewis Horizon flickered somewhere on a newspaper someone left behind, or in a quick exchange between 2 doctors discussing an equipment grant. They promised more ventilators, one said, but apparently there's an investigation tied to the old Starlight Fund. Starlight. The name echoed faintly from my past. My mother had mentioned it, the Children's Cancer Support Fund, where my father worked as an accountant before he disappeared. I'd never looked further. For years, our family avoided old matters. When my shift ended, I went to the parking lot. My Civic was gone. A small receipt was taped to the railing. Your vehicle is being serviced at Horizon Auto Care Complimentary by order of Mr. C. Lewis. I exhaled softly, half grateful, half suspicious. That afternoon, rain fell over Boston. When I got home, a pristine white envelope sat at my door. Stamped no address, only my name handwritten, Helen Martinez. Inside was a jet black business card, silver letters deeply debossed Naomi Park, Chief Legal Officer, Lewis Horizon Group, along with a slant-headed handwritten line. Thank you for signing the confidentiality agreement. There's something regarding your father. Please make time to meet me. CL. I stood still for a long time. Something was wrong. I hadn't signed anything. I'd only brought the document home and set it on the table. It was still there between two of Ava's books. The door opened. Mrs. Watterson came in raincoat dripping, smiling kindly. "They towed your car this morning. Said it'll be returned at no charge. You're lucky. The garage is called Horizon Auto Care." She paused, squinting. Horizon? As in Lewis Horizon. They're famous. Do you know someone there? I gave a wan smile. Not exactly. Just a wrong door at the wrong hour. My dear, she said, shaking her head, nothing is accidentally wrong in this world. The next morning, I went to the Lewis Horizon building, driven by a curiosity I didn't quite understand. The headquarters in Back Bay mirrored the silver-gray sky, a giant pane reflecting the city in itself. Inside, white lights spread evenly. People crept like numbers running through a spreadsheet. The brunette receptionist smiled. "Hello, Ms. Martinez. Please go up to the 42nd floor. They're expecting you." They, Mr. Lewis and Ms. Park. I pressed my lips together and entered the elevator. When the doors opened, the air on the 42nd floor felt different. Strong coffee and cold metal. In a large glass conference room, Christian stood with his back to me, hands in his pockets, looking out over the long ribbon of the Charles River. Naomi Park sat at the head of the table beside a stack of files as thick as a patient's chart. "You're here," Christian said in that low voice, unsurprised. "I haven't signed anything," I said, still braced. "We know. But you need to hear this before you decide whether to sign." Naomi slid a file toward me. The first line hit me squarely. Daniel Martin, Chief Accountant, Starlight Children Fund. I froze. "Your father worked at Starlight 15 years ago," Naomi said. "In 2010, $2 million in donations vanished. Mr. Martin was listed as a primary suspect. And then, he disappeared. Did you know that I swallowed? My mother only said he died in an accident." Christian turned his gaze, resting on me sharp and sorrowful, like steel reflected in water. "There's no accident report. No death certificate, no funeral. 2 days ago, I discovered that someone had reused Daniel Martin's signature to certify old Starlight ledgers. Those records were sent directly to the Securities Commission. You're saying? I'm saying someone is exploiting your father's name to launch an attack on me." The room fell as silent as an ICU when a heart monitor flattened. I steadied myself. "And you think I'm involved?" Naomi answered first. "No, the opposite. We think you can help clear your father's name and keep this scandal from wrecking the company. You might be the only person who can recognize his handwriting or any telltale sign of what's real and what isn't." Christian pulled a creased fax page from his pocket. The signature at the bottom was so familiar, it stole my breath. That slant the loop in the D, the slightly off-center dot my father's. I had tried to imitate it as a child. But one thing was wrong. The ink line broke and jerked like from a trembling pen. My father's hand was steady, even when tired. "This isn't his signature," I whispered. "He never wrote Daniel M. He always signed the full Daniel Martin." Christian looked at me long enough that I had to glance away. "Thank you," he said softly. "That's what we needed confirmed." Naomi closed the folder. "But it doesn't end here. Whoever forged this may try to use you to legitimize the signature. If the press discovers your father worked for Starlight, they'll tail you first. We want to protect you and the child." "Protect?" I let out a strained laugh. "How?" "Put me in one of your glass towers?" Christian folded his arms, his calm almost unnerving by not letting you become a tabloid headline. "I have a vacant apartment in Cambridge near the preschool. We can arrange for you and Ava to stay there until this ends. You're doing this out of pity." His eyes moved slowly and settled on mine. "No, out of responsibility. That night I let you step into my fight. Now it's casting a shadow over your life. I won't let that happen again." I went quiet. I didn't know if it was his words or how he said them come with a promise thrumming beneath. Naomi placed another sheet on the table. "This is a temporary consulting contract. Lewis Horizon will retain you as a Starlight Records support specialist, with nominal pay. It's legal and gives you a legitimate reason to appear with us." I looked at the records support specialist title and felt my pulse stumble. "I'm just a nurse. "The best, Nurse Mass General has," Christian said. I asked. "They told you received a citation for staying calm during a code." "That's exactly what I need." He said it, then turned toward the window. Pale light broke into white bands across his shoulders. I remembered him waiting in the car until I went inside the night before, silent patient, like a man accustomed to waiting for people who no longer trust anyone. That afternoon, I signed the contract. I won't let that happen again, not for the money or curiosity, but for the sentence. When I stepped out of the building, a light rain still fell. Christian walked behind me, a black umbrella spread wide. He said nothing, just opened the car door. I was about to refuse when my phone rang. Mrs. Watterson, her voice tight with worry. "Helen, someone just came by asking for you. They said they're financial reporters asking about Mr. Daniel Martin. They even knew Ava's name." My hands trembled. Christian touched my shoulder lightly. "Get in, I'll handle it." The words were simple, yet somehow I heard something like, "From now on, you're not alone. Night." The temporary apartment in Cambridge glowed softly, ivory walls, windows overlooking a garden. Ava ran circles with a new toy Christian's assistant had brought a robotic beaver that thumped its tail. I laughed helpless. "You really like it, huh?" "Yes, his name is Beaky." Ava said Beaky is like Mr. Christian, so earnest that I nearly choked on my water. "Why is that?" "Because he doesn't talk much, but he protects people." I turned away, biting my lip to hide a smile. Christian was in the living room, sleeves rolled, answering a call while opening his laptop. The screen light split his face into half glow, half shadow, as if even the lamp was trying to decide which side he belonged to. The call ended. He looked up, voice low. "Naomi reported that my main rival, K Alpha Fund, filed an anonymous complaint. They're using your father's name to prove I embezzled donations. But we have an edge objective evidence is starting to surface. And me, you're the first person they'll target." He paused, meeting my eyes. "They'll lie. They'll paint your father as a traitor, and you as the heir to that stain. But if you want the truth, I promise I'll go all the way with you." I looked at him. Something shifted inside me, not quite trust, not quite fear. More like the feeling before a risky surgery. You know the odds, and still you squeeze the patient's hand and say, "We can do this." Outside, the rain had eased to faint stray drops. Ava squealed with laughter in the next room. The robot beaver thumped out a steady rhythm. I thought sometimes fate doesn't knock with thunder. It comes as a blurred fax and a man with eyes the color of winter seas. And tonight I knew that what was opening wasn't just the old records of a charity fund, it was the second door I had knocked on a door with no road back. A thin sunlight spread over Cambridge's damp roof tiles, like a silk scarf just shaken loose on Tuesday morning. I opened my eyes and for a moment couldn't remember where I was. This room was too quiet, too neat, and carried a light wood scent that didn't belong to me. Ava slept under her star-patterned blanket on the armchair by the window, cheeks softly flushed. Beside her lay a neatly placed handwritten note. I asked the driver to bring breakfast. "Naomi will stop by at 8. Don't worry, just formalities." See, Christian's handwriting was tidy, slightly slanted as if from someone who keeps everything under control but sometimes surrenders to feeling. I set the note down and stepped to the window. Outside, the garden was beaded with mist. The rows of maple trees were beginning to turn. In the corner stood an oak bench where Christian had talked on the phone last night in the rain, and his voice low and deep, almost a kind of audible silence. Part of me still didn't understand why I was here, a regular nurse caught in the spiral of a high-stakes financial scandal. But another part, the more fragile, knew perfectly well I stayed because of him. Not for his wealth, but for how he looked at me last night. The look of a man standing between faith and faithlessness, still choosing to believe. The doorbell rang at 8:10. Naomi Park stepped in with her usual professional composure. Gray trench coat hair in a neat bun, a slim folder in hand. She glanced around, then smiled. Nice. He rarely lets anyone stay in this apartment. Probably because it faces the river and he doesn't like seeing water. I blinked. He doesn't like water. His father died at sea off Nantucket, a yacht accident. Since then, Christian drinks his coffee on ice, never swims, and always lives in homes with windows facing the river. To remind himself not to forget. I fell quiet. The brief story felt like a small puzzle piece, just enough to sketch a faint outline on a still unfinished portrait. Naomi sat and opened the folder. Today, we only need you to sign an access acknowledgement for Starlight Records. We're not asking you to go public with anything, but I need you to see this. She slid over several photocopied pages, wire transfers and payment vouchers, bearing Daniel Martin's name, which were stamped faintly with dates from 2010. My chest tightened. The phrase Children Medical Grant repeated line after line, but one figure at the end was anomalous. $628,000 routed to a company called Horizon Relief Limited. Is that company connected to Lewis Horizon? I asked. Naomi gave a thin smile. No, which is precisely why it's alarming. Someone created a look-alike to drag Christian into it. She paused, then held my gaze. Helen, honestly, can you contact your father? I shook my head. No, he disappeared when I was 18. My mother got a short call, his voice trembling. He only managed, "Don't trust anyone." Then nothing. Naomi jotted a note, her eyes darkening. We have traces suggesting that Daniel M. has been collecting a falsified pension in New Mexico since 2015. If that's your father, he never died. The words knocked me back in my chair. You're saying he might be alive? It's possible. The room went still. Outside wind slid along the window frame, sounding like a long sigh from someone who couldn't pause their lives. That afternoon, after Naomi left, I stepped onto the porch. Christian stood on the steps with a coffee cup light slanting across his shoulders. He didn't ask what Naomi had said. He set a small key ring on the railing. Keys to this apartment. And go to the garage if you need the car. You're not afraid I'll take everything and vanish? I asked, half teasing. No, he said, eyes fixed on the garden. I'm only afraid you'll vanish without a word. I wanted to answer, but my throat went dry. There was something in how he spoke, the composure of someone who has lost too much to grip anything in a hurry. A breeze lifted a few strands of my hair. Christian reached out and gently freed one that had caught on my shoulder. The motion was small, unhurried, and it set my heart off beat. Did you review the files? He asked, voice softer. Yes, Naomi said. My father might be alive. His gaze flickered like a ripple on water. I assume you'll look for him. I don't know. I'm afraid that if he is alive, it means he once abandoned me. Maybe he left to protect you. He said it with a steady conviction, as if he believed in something he'd never witnessed. I looked up and met that gaze, the kind that's warm enough to make you believe, if only for a second. In the following days, I began working with the internal investigations team. The Cambridge apartment became a safe house where I moved between the hospital and Horizon's offices. I read hundreds of ledger copies, searching for a detail to clear my father's name. Christian often appeared near day's end, bringing coffee or sandwiches, and sitting at the table while I read. He never hurried me, never probed too much. One evening, I dozed off at the desk cheek on a stack of documents. When I woke, it was late. A light blanket had been draped over my shoulders. Beside me sat a still warm cup of tea. On the rim, a tiny line in ballpoint ink sleep. I'm still here. C. I smiled, a strange feeling rising, safe yet perilous, like standing at the edge of a beautiful cliff. Thursday night, Naomi called. Helen, are you free tomorrow evening? Christian would like you to attend a gathering in Beacon Hill, a friendly pre-meeting before the shareholders' session. I hesitated. I don't fit in at places like that. Go, Naomi said, gentle but firm. He doesn't invite people without a reason. The next evening I went. The old hilltop house blazed against the night, hundreds of crystal lights, hanging like drops of hardened honey. I wore the pale blue dress Naomi had. Scent, simple, elegant. When I entered, the conversation was slow. Christian was speaking with a cluster of major shareholders, but his eyes found me within a heartbeat and stayed as if he'd forgotten the thread. He crossed to me and lightly adjusted a ribbon on my shoulder. You came. I was afraid you'd choose to hide. I thought about it, I said, trying to smother a smile. A soft jazz number rose. He held out his hand, half invitation. Half commando and dance. Let them think I'm still human. I set my hand in his. First sensation, warmth. Second, a peculiar calm. The slow turns across the floor made me forget time, the numbers, the files, forget that somewhere out there someone was using my father's name to destroy him. But the world hadn't forgotten us. Mid-song, Naomi moved quickly to us, whispering in Christian's ear. Victor Kane released the Starlight records to the press. They have an original with Daniel Martin's signature. His fingers tightened around mine. Light struck his cheekbones, sharpening into something cold. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Tonight won't be a party." 30 minutes later, we left Beacon Hill. Reporters were already flooding the sidewalk. His phone rang non-stop in the car, Naomi advisors shareholders media. Christian silenced it, eyes on the road. "Do you think the signature is authentic?" I asked. "No, but if others do, I lose everything." "And what about me?" He glanced over, brief but deep. "You're the reason I still want to keep everything." I didn't answer. Outside, flashes sparked again, small arrows from the world, aiming to pierce the fragile wall of quiet between us. He said softly, "Helen, if they publish the original, I'll need you to verify it. Not for me, but for the truth. I won't force you, but only you can see what they won't." I looked at him, the man who had just danced with me, now speaking in the language of strategy shares and risk, like reciting an extraordinary prayer. "All right," I said. "If I have to face the past, I want to do it with you." Christian tilted his head, the barest flicker of a smile. Together is manageable, alone is not. That night when we returned to Cambridge, Ava was fast asleep. I sat on the floor, staring through the window where the moon shimmered on the river. My father's old fax still lay on the table, letters, fading like a distant breath. I laid my fingers on its edge and felt my heart tremble. What I'm seeking isn't only to clear my father, but an answer for myself. Why a man could make me believe even as the world collapses around him. Then on my phone screen a message appeared, CL. "Tomorrow 8 a.m., Horizon office. There's something you need to see. Don't be afraid. I'll be there." I studied the line for a long moment. Outside, the Charles rolled on quietly, as if carrying all our secrets toward a place where only the truth remains. I don't know what waits ahead, but I know that my heart has stepped fully into his battle from tonight, unwillingly, gently, with no way back. That morning, Boston's sky was as dull as paper about to be crumpled. Early winter wind threaded through the bare trees, hissing as thin as a blade. I woke before dawn, chest-tight hand on my phone, the message from Christian. "Still there, 8 a.m., Horizon office. There's something you need to see. Don't be afraid. I'll be there." I sat for a long while staring at "Don't be afraid." Strange how just 2 words could cinch my chest. Not because I was scared, but because the man who said them seemed like someone who had rarely known peace. The Lewis Horizon office in Manhattan was a massive glass block, reflecting the gray clouds and the rush of people below. I never imagined stepping into that world, where every handshake carries an invisible wager. When the elevator doors opened, Naomi was waiting, still in her precisely cut business suit, so keen they seemed to see through polite expressions. "He's waiting for you," Naomi said. "There are also attorneys from the SEC who want to meet." I faltered. "The Securities and Exchange Commission says they've received the original Starlight files from K Alpha Fund. If they're authentic, they'll open a formal investigation." I drew a breath, reeling. Naomi looked at me, and for once her gaze wasn't all steel. It softened. "Christian believes you, and I want to think too." From a woman who trusted only contracts and clauses, that brief admission felt strangely moving. The conference room on the 52nd floor blazed with light. In the center sat a long walnut table lined with tidy stacks of files. Starlight Audit, Case 2010 glowed on the large screen. Christian stood by the window in a white shirt and gray tie, looking down at the avenue. When I entered, he turned. A faint smile drifted across his face and vanished like smoke. "Good morning, Helen," he said. "I hope you haven't changed your mind. I'm here, so I probably haven't." He nodded. "Good, because they're about to arrive." Before I could sit, the door opened. 2 men walked in, one middle-aged with salt and pepper hair, a subtly patterned vest, eyes sharp as a knife's edge. The other younger, cradling a thick stack of documents. Mason read SEC. Christian said briskly, "And this is Helen Martinez, a potential witness." Mason shook my hand dry cold. You're Daniel Martin's daughter? Yes. Good. We just received a letter signed by Daniel Martin from an address in Santa Fe. Its contents are interesting. I looked up. What did you say? Mason opened his bag and produced a pale yellow envelope sealed in red. He drew out a sheet and laid it on the table. I saw the first line at once. To Lewis Horizon Group, I. Daniel Martin confirmed that the Starlight documents are genuine and that Christian Lewis was directly involved in redirecting funds. My heart missed a beat. At the bottom was the signature, Daniel M., painfully familiar. I don't believe this is real, I said, my voice rasping. Christian said nothing, eyes fixed on the page. But I saw his hand tighten on the table's edge, the only sign of a man forcing himself to stay calm. Naomi cut in quickly. We'll need ink and paper for forensics. Nothing can be concluded from an original that hasn't been authenticated. Mason shrugged. That's your prerogative. But the press already has a copy. This afternoon's shareholder meeting could get interesting. He smiled, gathered the papers, and left. The door shut, and a dense silence pooled in the room. I walked to the window. Below Manhattan teemed with cars and Light's hot blood coursing through the city's veins. Do you think my father did this? I asked without turning. No, Christian said instantly without hesitation. But someone is using him to kill me most legally by a half-truth. I turned. Half-truth. If part of it's real, the rest doesn't matter. They don't need him to lie only to write what they want. His voice sank a glint in his eyes, equal parts anger and pity. Victor Kane always chooses the most painful angle of attack. I looked at Christian. He seemed exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from being strong for everyone else. Do you have any proof you're innocent? I asked. Yes, he said. But we're missing one piece, the original transaction logs, and only one person has them, your father. The words chilled my spine. You think he's alive? I trust Naomi's lead. Someone is using him or impersonating him to swing public opinion. So now what? His gaze was steady deep. Now we fly to Santa Fe. The afternoon flight was sunlit and cold. Christian barely spoke, staring out the window. When the light reflected off the glass, I saw his silhouette, a solitary man in a noisy world. I found myself asking, have you ever truly trusted anyone? He tilted his head. I used to think I trusted everyone. In truth, I trusted the systems I built. They're more predictable than people. And now. He paused, turned to me. Maybe I'm learning to trust what can't be predicted. I smiled faintly. Sounds like a diagnosis. Maybe, but it's a condition I don't want cured. Light words soft as breathy, yet enough to set my heart trembling, half afraid, half willing to go further. Santa Fe greeted us with pale sun and dry wind. Naomi had sent the address from the letter ahead of time. It was a small wooden house on the desert's edge, ringed with cacti, the wind blowing sand like mist. The weathered door opened when Christian knocked. A thin man with white hair and a gray sweater appeared. His eyes were bright and bewildered. Can I help you? I couldn't breathe. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, my father alive or dead, what his first words would be. The reality was quiet to the point of cruelty. Dad, I whispered. He stopped short, eyes widening. Helen. His voice trembled like a string in the wind. He came closer and touched my cheek. My God, you've grown. Tears fell before I understood them. I wanted to embrace him, but Christian's hand on my shoulder reminded me steady. Seated inside Daniel spoke in a flat cadence, as if reading someone else's memories. In 2010, he discovered Starlight was being siphoned through dummy accounts. He meant to report it, but under Victor Kane's umbrella, the manager threatened his wife if he didn't stay quiet. They forced him to sign sham papers, then vanish. I didn't dare make contact. Your mother passed early. I was afraid to drag you into it, he said. Eyes hollowed. And that letter to Horizon? I didn't write it. Someone came last week and said they needed to verify my identity, then disappeared. I didn't think they'd use it. Christian was silent. When Daniel pulled a small USB from a drawer, he finally spoke. These are the logs we need. Thank you. You trust me? My father asked. I trust her, Christian said, glancing gently my way. And she trusts you. On the drive back to the hotel, the desert wind lifted tiny dust swirls. I leaned my head against the window mind in a tangle. Christian kept quiet hands steady on the wheelchair as an even heartbeat in an ICU room. At last, he said, "You've found your father. You can step away from all of this now. I'll handle the rest." "You're sending me away, no. I'm keeping my promise not to let my mess shadow your life anymore." I turned to him. The sunset split his face into two tones, tender and cold with loneliness. "Perhaps you forget." I said softly, "We walked into this together. I'm not leaving halfway." Christian smiled, tired but warm. "I haven't forgotten. I don't want you hurt." "Pain is the only proof I'm still here," I said. He fell silent. The wind scratched at the glass, and for a moment I realized we were no longer two strangers who met in a Boston storm. We'd become two people carrying the same fear and fragile faith that something true survives inside the lies. Outside, the red sunset swallowed the desert. Inside the car, Christian tightened his grip on the wheel, his voice small as a prayer. "When we're back in New York tomorrow, everything will start to change." I didn't know if he meant the case or us. But in that flickering dusk, I believed some storms must be faced together, whatever the ending. The Lewis Horizon private jet landed in Nantucket late in the afternoon. Sunlight poured over the ocean like honey spilling from the sky, reflecting off rows of white-framed windows along the bay. I sat in the car watching the maple trees burn slowly into amber. Beside me, Christian was silent, one hand resting on the wheel, his eyes fixed on a narrow road, leading toward a small wooden house nestled among wild daisies. "Is that your house?" I asked, leaning slightly toward the window. "My family's," he said quietly. "My mother used to grow flowers in the backyard. My father loved the sea. After he died, I kept everything the same." "Aren't you afraid the salt air will rot the wood?" He turned the corner of his mouth, curving faintly. "I'm more afraid of forgetting them." The car stopped at the porch. The scent of salt brushed my face, carried by the crashing waves against the rock. Far away, a lighthouse blinked its watchful eye over the water. The house was smaller than I'd imagined, weathered cedar walls, white-painted window frames, linen curtains rippling softly. From inside came the sound of laughter. Ava running circles with Mrs. Watterson, who had arrived earlier. Both wore wool hats and carried little baskets filled with seashells. "It's her first time seeing the ocean," Christian said, as he held the door for me. "You should go out there." The living room smelled faintly of pine and vanilla. On the piano stood an old family photograph of a man with Christian's eyes and a smiling woman holding a bouquet of lavender beside him. On the table, a slim folder waited. "I brought a few things," Christian said, catching my glance. "But not for tonight. Here, I want you to breathe." I laughed. "I am breathing." "No, Helen. You live, but you haven't really breathed." He said it softly, like wind gliding over skin, but it struck deep. I didn't answer. Outside, Ava squealed at a tiny fish she'd caught in a tide pool. The sound of waves and laughter mingled, until for a fleeting moment the world lost its sharp edges. We dined on the porch that evening, just 4 of us. Christian, Ava, Mrs. Watterson, and me. A red checkered tablecloth, grilled fish with garlic butter, crisp bread, and white wine. Ava talked non-stop, describing her smallest fish in the world. "What's its name?" Christian teased. "Sir Bubbles, because he makes bubbles." Her seriousness made everyone laugh. "Sounds like a little gentleman," Christian said with a faint smile. "I hope he knows how lucky he is to have you." His gaze lingered on her face, warm in a way I'd never seen. For an instant, he wasn't the CEO, not the man of power, but a man who could come home, loosen his tie, and truly laugh. After dinner, Ava went to bed. Night fell under a soft veil of mist, the ocean's scent thicker. I stepped onto the porch, wrapping my cardigan tighter. Christian was already there, a glass of wine in hand, eyes fixed on the dark sea. He said quietly that I used to think the sea was beautiful only when someone else saw it with me. It turns out it is not very comforting when you're the only ones looking. I stood beside him. "Do you still come every year?" "Only once? On my father's death day?" I stayed silent. A gust of briny wind slipped past. He set the glass on the rail, gaze still far away. "My father founded Starlight," he said. "He created it in memory of my mother. She died of heart failure. When the fund was embezzled, his reputation collapsed. A year later, he died in a yacht accident. I've always wondered if he couldn't bear the shame." His voice roughened on the last word. I looked down my chest, tightening. "Maybe he didn't choose to leave," I said softly. "Like my father, perhaps they were pushed away by those who knew how to twist the truth." He turned to me. "Are you saying that to comfort me or yourself?" I'm not sure. I smiled faintly. Maybe both. We stood in silence, listening to the surf. I could feel his breath blending with the cold sea air in that stillness. Without touch, the distance between us was close enough to remind me. Sometimes silence is the most intimate form of closeness. When I went inside, Christian was still on the porch. His shadow stretched long across the wooden floor, solitary as a wisp of smoke after a candle flame. I was about to close the door when he called Helen. I turned. "Tomorrow we'll open the data from your father's USB. It might change everything. Change how only two ways save me or destroy me." His tone was calm, but his eyes carried a quiet exhaustion in the warm light, in the warm glow. I stepped closer, my voice low. "Are you afraid?" A wry smile touched his lips. "I learned to live with fear long ago, but..." He paused, then murmured almost as if to himself, "I'm afraid of losing the people who believe in me." His words froze me. Maybe that was why he'd opened this house. He'd brought me and my daughter into a space filled with his most private memories. A man like Christian only lets someone in when he truly trusts. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Whatever's on that USB, I'll stay." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded gently. "I know, and thank you not for helping, but for daring to stay." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the windows. Ava and Mrs. Watterson had gone for an early walk. Christian sat at his desk laptop, open the USB plugged in. My heart thudded as I approached. "The data's encrypted," he said, eyes on the screen. "But there's one readable file. It's titled Letter 07. He clicked it open. Lines of italic text appeared, signed, Daniel Martin. "If you're reading this, I can no longer keep hiding." I was forced to sign false documents, but Christian Lewis was not in command. The man behind it is Victor Kane, who created a shell company called Horizon Relief Limited to launder funds. I stored copies of every transaction in this device. Deliver them to whoever can bring the truth to light. I have only one request: tell my daughter I never abandoned her. I barely heard the last line. Tears had blurred it. All I knew was Christian's hand resting gently on my shoulders, and not comforting, but confirming that everything we'd feared was true. "We can turn this around," he said softly. "If this file is authenticated, Victor's entire case collapses." I nodded, though another fear stirred. "Once you go public, they won't leave you alone." "Maybe, but I won't stay silent." He said it with the eyes of a man who had faced many storms, knowing he'd be hurt, but stepping forward anyway. By the time Ava and Mrs. Watterson returned, Christian had locked the USB in a small safe. The sky had turned slate gray. Wind swept across the sea. I went out to the porch, pulling my sweater close. He followed and stood beside me. He said, gazing toward the horizon, "The ocean keeps its secrets well. But when it returns something, it does so at precisely the right time. Like my father. And maybe, like me." I turned. Maybe I've been silent too long about what I'm afraid to lose, about the people I've let slip away." The wind tugged at his hair and the hem of his shirt. He continued, voice blending with the sound of waves. "Helen, you make me believe I can start again, not with the world, but with myself." I stood still, unsure what to say, hearing only the wild rhythm of my own heart. The sunset poured gold across the porch. I knew the moment was fragile, that ahead lay storms of media, of law of the past. Yet for those few fleeting seconds amid wind and surf, I believed what he'd just said. Sometimes beginnings aren't about where you go, but about who you dare to believe in. And I believed, not with the guarded logic of a woman once broken, but with the gentlest certainty that behind Christian Lewis's polished reserve, his heart too was learning how to breathe again, like the sea after a storm. Monday morning rain poured down on Boston. The drops struck the apartment windows in Cambridge, scattered across the surface of the Charles River, and broke into 1,000 tiny circles before fading away. I sat by the window, holding a cup of coffee. Gone cold, my mind like the river itself, not violent but never still. On the TV, hanging in the corner, the morning newscaster's even voice filled the room. Lewis Horizon Group has confirmed plans to release internal financial records later this week. However, investors are questioning the data's transparency after an anonymous source claimed there are signs of interference with the Starlight files. The words anonymous source jolted me. I didn't need to guess it was Victor Kane, the man who knew how to plant seeds of doubt in the public mind and make weeds look like flowers. Ava came running out, her hair tousled, clutching her toy beaver beakie. "Mommy, are you going to work today?" I smiled, brushing her hair back. "Of course. But I'll be home early." Christian had told me there'd be a closed meeting in Manhattan that morning. He wanted me to bring my father's original USB drive, the only critical piece of evidence, and hand it to him only once he confirmed it was safe. It sounded like something out of a spy movie. But I knew he wasn't being paranoid, just careful. For Christian, caution was his way of protecting what he cared about. The train to New York departed at 9. The sky hung heavy and gray, the buildings melting into the rain like erased sketches. I watched the blurred world pass by the window, the USB in my bag feeling heavier than ever, not in weight but in memory. I thought of that last evening in Nantucket, Christian sitting on the porch, reading my father's letter. Candlelight softened his face, warm but fragile. He'd said, "Helen, sometimes the truth doesn't free anyone. It just forces them to look straight into the pain they've been trying to forget." I hadn't understood then, but I do now. The truth wouldn't just save him, it would make the world see what he'd been hiding. That morning, the Lewis Horizon Tower was swarming with reporters. Even though Naomi had arranged a private entrance, I could still feel the chaos outside, the camera flashes, the shouts, the questions like bullets. Christian was waiting in his glass office on the 48th floor when the elevator doors opened. He wore a black shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. No tie. Behind him, rain streaked the windows, silver light tracing the edge of his shoulders. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," he said as I stepped in. "I promised I would." This time he said quietly, "Don't keep your promise for me. Please keep it for yourself." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then placed a thick envelope on the desk. "If anything happens, give this to Naomi. She'll know what to do." I touched the envelope. Inside were documents and a small memory card. "Where are you going?" He didn't answer. He only smiled, the kind of smile belonging to someone already chosen to walk into the dark. The meeting began at 10. I waited in the hallway, rows of empty seats around me. I saw Naomi, Christian, and 4 board members through the frosted glass. One of them represented the K Alpha Fund. I couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm sharp strained, ready to snap. Then I saw Christian stand, placing a folder on the table. His voice deep and steady, but heavy with fatigue, carried through the glass. "These are the complete Starlight transaction records. Every transfer verified, and the person behind it wasn't me." A bitter voice answered, "And who's left to prove that?" "Anyone alive." Moments later, the door opened. Naomi stepped out, pale. "We have a problem," she whispered. "The company just received a temporary asset freeze from the SEC. They believe the USB is counterfeit." I shot to my feet. "That's impossible." Christian followed her out, calm, but his eyes were tired. They moved faster than I thought. "Who did Victor Kane?" He sighed. He released another USB, same data slightly altered. "With both drives sharing an identical device ID, the SEC will label ours the fake." "Do we have any moves left?" Naomi asked. "One," Christian said, meeting my eyes. "But it depends on the one person. Victor never expected Daniel Martin." That afternoon, we flew to New Mexico. The rain chased us all the way to the desert. The wind picked up as the car left the highway, flinging sand against the windshield. My father's house stood silent in the gray light. When Christian knocked, no one answered. The door was ajar. Inside, dim, the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered. "Dad." I called. No response. We stepped inside. The room was untouched, furniture in place dust. Undisturbed, but a folded sheet of paper lay on the table. My hands trembled as I opened it. "They've found me. Don't come. Helen, trust no one, not even those who seem safe. I'm gone if you're reading this, but it's to protect you this time." Beneath the words was a smeared ink blot like someone had written in fear. Christian stared at the note silent. "They got to him." "No," I said firmly. "He ran. He's always known how to disappear." Naomi, who'd come with us, checked her phone. "Victor's live on air. He's announcing he'll reveal the true mastermind behind Starlight tonight." Christian gave a short, bitter laugh. "His show is ready to air." I looked at him uneasy. "So what now?" "We move first," he said. "Night." The storm hit in full force. Rain hammered the wooden roof like someone pouring buckets from the sky. Christian sat at the table, laptop open, while Naomi connected the USB to Horizon's secure server. I watched, breath caught, as lines of code flashed across the screen, the data my father had left us slowly unlocking. Then Naomi froze. "There's a section locked with a personal key username HL." My heart stopped. HL? Could it stand for Helen Lewis? Christian stiffened. "No, it was my mother." I turned to him. "You mean—" A faint, sorrowful smile touched his lips. "So she was the key all along. Naomi tried to break in but was blocked." Christian stepped forward, typed a few characters, and the folder opened. Dozens of images appeared, scanned faxes, old emails. And among them, a grainy video flickered to life. Christian's mother, Elizabeth Lewis, sat in a small office facing Victor Kane. Her voice trembled. "If you do this, Christian will lose everything. Sometimes loss is the only way to teach the value of power," Victor replied. "Sign it, Elizabeth." She shook her head. "I won't betray my husband." The video ended, there fading into static. I looked up. Christian was staring at the screen, his knuckles white. She knew he whispered. My mother knew everything. She tried to stop him. Victor orchestrated my father's death and pinned it all on Starlight. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone." He turned, eyes dark and glistening. "No, not anymore." Thunder cracked outside. The window rattled as if the storm wanted to tear the house from its foundations. Christian looked out into the rain, his voice deep and steady. "Tomorrow night, I'm going live. No more hiding. If the truth costs me everything, so be it. It will clear your father's name and theirs." I held his gaze. His face was lit in the flash of lightning. No longer cold as the man I'd met that first night, but resolute, almost achingly human. When I whispered, "I'll be there," he only said softly, "I know." Outside, the rain still hadn't stopped. But through the howl of the storm, I felt a small, steady light growing inside me. A light that bore his name, Christian Lewis. Manhattan's sky hung low like a leaden curtain over the glittering towers that night. The rain had stopped, but moisture clung to the streets, making the whole city seem to reflect itself. Hazy, shimmering, and heavy. I stood in the green room on the 50th floor of the WNT News Network building, watching Christian through the one-way glass. He spoke with the anchor-composed, clear-eyed, his voice steady and low, as if the storm outside had nothing to do with him. "He's really going to reveal everything," Naomi whispered, worry threading her voice. I nodded. "If he doesn't do it now, Victor will move first, and he'll have nothing left to lose." Naomi gave a dry smile. "He's already lost almost everything. But he's still clinging to one thing he doesn't realize he's trying to keep." I looked at her silent. Her words fell into me like a small stone. I knew what she meant. She meant me. But once feeling is tangled up with fear, it's no longer easy to tease apart. 8:15 p.m. The studio lights came up, the whir of cameras mixed with keystrokes from the control room. On the big hallway monitor, Christian's face appeared. He wore a black suit jacket unbuttoned. He sat straight, fingers loosely laced before him. The anchor, Jared Cole, opened in his measured tone. Tonight on WNT, we're joined by Christian Lewis, CEO of Lewis Horizon Group, who faces allegations of manipulating the Starlight Fund, a case that has shaken Wall Street. The lights panned and settled on Christian. He drew a breath and began, "Thank you for the chance to speak. I'm not here to justify myself. I'm here to tell a story that for too long, no one wanted to hear. He paused, choosing words that would wound the fewest people, then continued. The Starlight Fund was my father's legacy. It was meant to help children with heart disease, but it was turned into a laundering machine. The person behind it wasn't me. It was Victor Kane, my father's former partner, who manipulated audit systems to turn victims into culprits. Jared's doubt edged his next question. Do you have proof of this? Christian nodded. I do, and I'll present it right here, right now. In the outer room, Naomi held her breath. I felt the air thicken as if everyone stood at the brink of a truth that might detonate at any second. He signaled the tech. The screen behind him flickered to the grainy video, his mother, Elizabeth Lewis, speaking with Victor Kane, the clip we'd retrieved from the USB. Her voice faint but clear. If you do this, Christian will lose everything. Sometimes loss is the only way to teach the value of power, Victor replied. The studio went dead silent. Then Christian said, voice low and firm. My father died because of him. My mother was silenced. And now he wants to kill my name to erase the trail. But there is someone he didn't account for. He looked straight into the lens. Daniel Martin. My chest tightened. He, the chief accountant of Starlight, kept the real transaction records. And he left that evidence with his daughter, who is here tonight. Jared turned toward me. Ms. Helen Martinez. A light snapped on above me. I heard a camera swing. The glare cut across my face and I almost stepped back. Christian Rose came toward me and offered his hand, his eyes a quiet anchor, gentle and unyielding. Are you ready to tell the truth? He asked, just loud enough for me to hear. I swallowed and stepped forward. I can only say what I know. Every light shifted to me. I opened the authenticated file. The USB my father left contains copies of the actual transfers with signatures and bank certifications. Not a single line connects to Lewis Horizon. On the contrary, all routes lead to subsidiaries of K Alpha Fund controlled by Victor Kane. A low rumble of voices rose around the studio. Jared glanced toward the crew, then back to Christian. If this is true, you've been defamed for 10 years. Christian's smile was faint, part proud, part sad. Not just me, the ones who died for keeping quiet too. The broadcast ended to scattered applause from the crew. But outside, the world was not quiet. Naomi's phone wouldn't stop ringing, and emails were flooding in by the hundreds from journalists, lawyers, and shareholders. The real storm had begun. Christian stepped out into the corridor. The neon lights washed his shoulders in a cold glow. He didn't speak, just looked at me with something too large to fit into words. Are you okay? I asked softly. I am, he said, though his voice rasped like a string pulled too tight. It's just, I'm not used to being believed. I moved closer and touched his wrist, small as the gesture was. He startled a little as if pulled back into the room. You don't have to get used to it, I said. Just trust that you deserve it. He looked at me longer then. And I realized some moments don't need words, only the knowledge that the other person is still there while the world spins. We left the building at midnight. Manhattan was a sea of light. Every pane of glass reflected two figures walking side by side, not holding hands but in step. The night wind was sharp, lifting the edge of my coat. Christian drove me to a hotel near the Hudson. When the car stopped, he didn't turn off the engine. He sat looking out over the dark water. I used to think he said slowly that love was a luxury reserved for people who aren't busy fighting. I turned to him silent. But it seems I was wrong. He paused, then smiled barely. Fighting for what you believe in and loving someone are the same thing. I didn't know what to say. Half his face lay in shadow and half in glow in the muted streetlight. Like the man himself, half reason, half feeling, both true. Quietly, I asked, Are you sure you want me to stay? He tilted his head. This smile was softer. Truer. If you go, I don't know what I have left to believe in. I didn't sleep that night. The Hudson whispered against the curtains, carrying the faraway call of ship horns. I stepped onto the balcony, watching the city lights scatter over the water, glimmering like fragments of memory not yet settled. Christian texted, News is exploding. Victor has disappeared from New York. He knows we have proof. I replied. Are you afraid? A minute later, no, I'm afraid of losing my reason to keep going. I sat down full of unnamed things. When two people cross a dark stretch together, they don't need definitions between them. All they need, however fragile, is belief. The next morning, the sky was startlingly clear. On TV, the news reported Lewis Horizon's asset freeze has been lifted. Evidence from Daniel Martin's original USB has been authenticated. Meanwhile, Victor Kane is now wanted nationwide. Ava ran over and hugged me, kissing my cheek. Mommy, is Mr. Christian safe now? I smiled. Yes, he's safe. But I knew in my heart some battles never really end. They only quiet down long enough for you to breathe. That afternoon, Christian asked me to come to Horizon's office. When I arrived, he stood by the window, hands in his pockets, eyes on the Hudson. The company's safe now, I said. You could rest. He turned and gave a small smile. And you? Me. I smiled back. I have to get home to Ava. He stepped closer, stopping a breath away. His gaze was no longer the measured concern of those first days, but something more profound, steadier, truer. Thank you for staying, he said. I've lost too much, but at least I haven't lost my chance to believe in someone. My heart trembled, like a small sail catching wind for the first time. And in that moment, I knew, whatever lay ahead between us, the night before would remain an indelible mark, the night the truth was spoken. Two people who feared trusting each other learned how to trust. Outside Manhattan blazed awake. A new day began, and inside me, something opened like clear but enduring like dawn after rain. 3 days after the broadcast, the atmosphere at Lewis Horizon felt entirely renewed. News of the Starlight case filled every major network, but for the first time, the headlines carried no trace of accusation. Lewis Horizon, cleared of all allegations. Original USB exposes Victor Kane's financial conspiracy, the man who stayed silent for 10 years. Finally speaks. I read those lines in a small cafe on Tremont Street where morning sunlight spilled through the window, spreading a warm glow across the wooden table. Ava sat across from me holding a powdered donut, her cheeks dusted with sugar, while I tried to hide a smile. Mom, will Mr. Christian be on TV again? She asked, eyes sparkling like tiny crystals. No, sweetheart. He doesn't like the spotlight. Then why did he keep looking at you when he was talking? Her question froze me. I opened my mouth to answer, but only smiled, wiping the sugar from her lips. Children always see the things adults try so hard to hide. That afternoon, Naomi called. Her voice sounded less sharp than usual, carrying a careful tone. Helen, he's leaving. I know. He said he needed a break. Not a break, for good. He's handing over the reins to the board. He's flying to Nantucket today. I stiffened. Alone? Yes, he said all he needs is wind and sea. But Helen... Naomi paused. I'm not sure he's coming back. I lowered the phone, staring out the cafe window. The sun was setting, pulling its light out of the glass like a curtain being drawn. Something inside me felt hollow, as if the one thing that truly mattered had just slipped out of the world I was trying to hold on to. I reached Nantucket that night. The sea was black, the wind sharp and howling. Light from the old lighthouse swept slowly across the waves. The door was ajar when I entered the wooden house, and the fire still burned in the hearth. Christian sat before it wearing a dark sweater and a glass of whiskey. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He said, I knew you'd come, voice deep and warm but weary. I didn't think you wanted to see anyone. I don't. But I needed to. I walked closer and sat across from him. The firelight painted his face in shifting shades of gold and shadow a man who had won a war but lost part of himself. Where will you go? I asked. Naomi told you. I nodded. He drew a breath. My father used to say once a ship has survived the storm, the captain should leave the deck and let others steer. I think it's time. And your mother, she's at peace now. I may learn what that means. I watched him saw the exhaustion behind his calmness. For days, he'd faced the media, the courts, the board, the entire world. Everyone saw a CEO standing tall, but no one asked if he still remembered how to be human. Softly, I asked, if you go, what happens to everything you built? Lewis Horizon doesn't need me anymore, but you... He stopped, his gaze cutting straight through me. I couldn't answer. My heart pounded hard, every beat a question I'd been avoiding for too long. He set the glass down and stepped closer. His voice dropped to a near whisper. These past days, you stayed for justice, for truth. But part of me, selfishly, wanted to believe you waited for me. I looked up. You think I'm fine? No, I think you're hiding. Hiding what? Your feelings, Helen. Time seemed to stop. The only sounds were the fire crackling and waves crashing distantly against the rocks. Christian leaned closer, his eyes no longer those of a man consumed by battle, but of someone finally ready to speak his truth. He said quietly, I'm not good at this, but I know I want you to stay, not for the USB or lawsuits, just because you make me feel human again. I whispered, you don't have to say it. Yes, he cut in gently. I do, because if I don't say it now, I may never get another chance. I closed my eyes, and he was already so near when I opened them. The space between us was no more than a breath. And then he stopped, hesitant, as if afraid of what would follow. I don't want you to stay out of pity, he murmured. If you wait, let it be your choice. Without thinking, I said, I made that choice long ago. He held my gaze for a long moment, and his lips finally met mine. The kiss came soft as the first breath of dawn, yet powerful enough to scatter every thought. Outside, the wind howled, but beneath it, I could hear his heartbeat, fast, real, unguarded. When I woke, the sky was turning pale. Christian sat on the porch, wrapped in a gray sweater, with a cup of coffee. The ocean beyond had begun to shift colors, from black to violet to the faint blush of sunrise. You didn't sleep, I asked. No, I didn't want to miss the first sunrise after the storm. I stepped out, pulling my coat around me. He took my hand gently, a simple touch that said, We're still here. I'll submit my resignation tomorrow, he said. Then I'll leave the States for a while. Where will you go? I'm not sure. Maybe Italy, where my father studied. I want to start over, not with a company, but with myself. I stayed quiet. Part of me wanted to ask him to stay. Another part knew some souls need silence to heal, and love sometimes means letting go at the right time. And you? He asked softly. Back to Boston, I have to. Ava has school, and I have the hospital. He smiled, the early light turning his eyes crystal clear. Then one day I'll come to Boston. Not for a board meeting, but for dinner. Just dinner, I teased. For the first time, yes, he said, half serious, half smiling. When the sun climbed higher, Christian drove me to the ferry dock. Before I stepped onto the wooden ramp, he leaned close, his voice barely above the wind. If anyone asks how I survived all this, I'll say, because someone believed in me when I no longer believed in myself. I said nothing, just nodded. Some words, however beautiful, are meant to be carried in silence. The boat departed, slicing through the waves. I looked back. Christian stood on the pier, tall and still, the wind curling around his coat. He raised a hand, and in that instant, I knew sometimes an ending isn't loss at all, but a quiet promise between two people who understand each other enough not to need more words. A week later, the papers reported that Lewis Horizon had stabilized with a new interim board appointed. As for Christian, no one knew where he was. Naomi only said he'd left quietly, leaving a card addressed to me, Helen. I'm somewhere with the sea, the wind, and an old piano. I don't know when I'll return. But please believe this, beautiful things don't vanish. They take time to return properly. If you see the sun rising over the Charles River one morning, know that somewhere I'm looking in the same direction. CL. I read the note again and again until I memorized it. Every morning on my way to work, crossing the Longfellow Bridge, sunlight shimmered on the water, and I'd glance eastward where the day begins. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid anymore because I knew that no matter how far apart we were, something unshakable remained between us that morning by the Nantucket shore. Two people who had lost everything found themselves again in the first light after the storm. The following spring, Boston turned green again. The rows of trees along the Charles began to bud, and the red brick streets were steeped in the scent of morning coffee. I still worked at the hospital, picked Ava up from school every afternoon, and kept looking out at the river whenever the sun rose. Life seemed steady until that morning when my inbox received an email with no sender's name. Its subject line was only 4 words. Let's meet again. Inside was a photo of a small cafe in Florence, Italy. On the table sat a cup of espresso and a fountain pen engraved with 3 letters. CLE. My heart thudded. Those 3 letters. I knew them well, were Christian Lewis Ellis, his full name, the one he'd told me on a rainy night in Nantucket when the whiskey had softened his voice. The last line of the email read, "If you still believe in dawn, come to Florence on April 12th. I sat there for a long time. Sunlight stretched across the window like an invitation at once distant and close. April 12th. Paritala Airport greeted me with air unlike Boston's, sweet warm with a hint of wine on the breeze. Under the early spring sun, Florence looked like an oil painting, red roofs, yellow walls, and church bells rolling across the square. Ava stayed with Mrs. Watterson. Before I left, she asked Mom, "Will you see Mr. Christian?" I only smiled because I wasn't sure whether to call what was coming a reunion or a belated dream. I found the cafe from the Foto La Terrazza di Fiume on the Arno near the Ponte Vecchio, a small place bougainvillea climbing its walls. Old wooden tables, the rich aroma of espresso. I chose a table by the window. Time moved slowly. Italian chatter mingled with the wheeze of an accordion on the street. I clasped the warm cup in my hands. Nearly half an hour later, a figure appeared on the terrace. The light slanted, and there he was, Christian in a white shirt and ash gray coat, a camera in hand. His hair was longer and darker, and his smile, the same one that made the world blur just a little around its edges. "I knew you'd come," he said low, and even as if the line had waited too long for daylight. "I knew you'd send the email." I answered, half smile, half tremor. He sat and ordered me a cappuccino. "You still take it without sugar?" "I thought you'd forgotten." "No. Some things I can forget, and some I can't." The words fell lightly between us and weighed more than they sounded. We were quiet for a few minutes, and the drip of porcelain filters marked time. I looked around. The place wasn't crowded. Most guests were locals. On the wall hung an oil painting of the sea, and I realized it was Nantucket. "Did you paint that?" I asked. He nodded. I needed something to remind me why I survived. "And that is, the woman who taught me that believing in someone isn't weakness, it's courage." I smiled softly. "You still talk like a CEO strategic to the bone." "No," he laughed. "I left the company. I'm working with a small charity now, teaching orphans photography. If the world once distorted my image, I want to teach someone how to tell their own story." I looked at his hands, once clenched around a steering wheel in a storm, now cradling a camera as if holding something fragile. There was a new Christian quieter, warmer, touched with a bit of sadness. In the afternoon, he walked with me along the Arno. Sunlight melted across the water, reflecting off pale yellow facades. We strolled, saying little. Some silences need no filling. They answer for themselves. "Don't you miss the States?" I asked as we paused on an old stone bridge. "I do," he said, eyes far off. "But if I return, I'll become who the world wants again, not who I want to be." "And who are you now?" He glanced at me, a faint smile on his lips. "A man who still believes dawn comes even after the darkest nights." The river breeze lifted a few strands of my hair. Christian reached out and brushed them from my cheek. The gesture made my heart dip, simple but full of what words couldn't carry. That evening, we ate near the Piazza della Signoria. Candlelight flickered on the table. A violin sang from the corner of the square. He poured wine, the flame casting ruby light into his eyes. "Florence is where my father proposed to my mother," he said, his voice low. "I came here to find the feeling of loving again, the one I used to fear." Why fear it? Because I always thought love was a risk. Then I realized that not loving is the greater one. I smiled. "You're being philosophical." "No," he said softly, "just honest." "And Helen, you still haven't answered me." "Answered what?" "Whether you're happy." I was silent. Happy, a word both complicated and straightforward. After everything, I still wasn't sure what it meant. I had Ava my work and a fragile peace, yet sometimes at night I still thought of his gaze on the Nantucket porch, the look that made me want to run and stay at once. I breathed, "I'm at peace. And you?" "Almost," he said, smiling. "It's just that sometimes peace gets lonely." We looked at each other. Amid the music and the wine time, slowed like a scene shot in slow motion, everything so luminous it felt too real to touch. On the way back, he led me across the Ponte Vecchio. Florence glowed. The goldsmiths' shops were shuttered, their lights mirrored on the river like ribbons of stars. Christian stopped at the center. "Helen," he asked softly, "do you ever think about that night in Nantucket?" "I still do. But I keep telling myself not to let memory become an anchor." He smiled, eyes tinged with both warmth and regret. We could both be learning how to drop anchor in the right place. The night breeze carried a breath of orange blossoms from nearby balconies. I looked at him about to speak, but he touched my hand lightly and whispered, "Don't say anything. Sometimes silence is more beautiful than any promise." I stood still. The light washed across his face. So gentle, it made me forget who I'd been before I met him. Christian was gone the next morning when I returned to the cafe. On the table lay only a postcard of the sea, his own brushwork. On the back in slanted black ink, "I'm off to shoot a new project in Cinque Terre. We may not meet again soon. But if you see a photo of a sunset with a lone man standing on the shore, remember, he isn't lonely. It's me looking toward the dawn where you live." Signed, CL. I read it repeatedly until the Florence sun climbed high bright and hammered gold. In the bustle of the street, I lifted my face to that light, so strong it could warm a heart. And I understood some loves don't need to end in a confession, a promise, or hands held until forever. They only need to exist, like dawn returning each day, quiet, steady, and always on time. I smiled and murmured to myself, not for anyone to hear, but as a message for the wind, I've seen the dawn, Christian. And I still believe. 3 months after the trip to Florence, Boston welcomed summer with crystal clear mornings. The Charles River gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the pale blue sky and the slow glide of kayaks across the water. Every morning I walked Ava to school across the Longfellow Bridge, stopped at the Beacon Street Cafe for my lightly frothed cappuccino, and looked east toward where the dawn had once begun. The world seemed to have settled back into its rhythm. But inside me, there was an emptiness, not vast enough to be called pain, yet not small enough to forget. On my desk at the hospital, I still kept the postcard Christian had sent from Florence. The ink had faded slightly, the letters leaning as if tired. Beneath his signature, he had written, "If you see a man standing by the sea with a camera one day, don't walk toward him too quickly. He's still learning to see the world through your eyes." I had read it hundreds of times, and each time my heart stilled, as though hearing an old melody again. That night, while I was organizing charts for my shift, Naomi called. Her voice was as calm as ever, but carried something new, an edge of excitement this time. "Helen, are you still in touch with him?" I froze. "With who, Christian?" "Yes, he's just been invited to speak at the Humanitarian Summit in New York. His Horizon Children Foundation has donated millions to pediatric heart surgeries in Kenya. He used most of his old company shares to start it. The press is calling him the man reborn after the scandal." I went silent, not because of the money, but because of that word reborn. He'd truly done it. What I once thought was only a metaphor, he had made real beginning again, right where he'd fallen. Naomi lowered her voice. "He asked about you, but didn't leave a number. I think he's still waiting for you to find him." I smiled faintly, though my heart sank into a quiet wave. A week later, I received a letter from the Horizon Children Foundation, inviting me to New York for the global launch of its medical outreach program. It was signed SELA. At the bottom, a line written by hand. "Some stories don't need to be rewritten, only read to the last page together." I knew then I had to go. Morning in Manhattan felt nothing like Boston loud, dazzling, and alive. The ballroom of the Waldorf shimmered beneath chandeliers, where tailored suits, silk gowns, and the clink of crystal glasses composed the overture of the upper world. And in that glittering room, I saw him. Christian stood on stage, microphone in hand, white shirt, no tie. The lights framed his face, bright, warm, achingly familiar. 10 years ago, he said I lost faith in the world and myself. But someone taught me that truth always returns to the light when faced with courage. Like a child who survives heart surgery, each beat proves someone's belief. The hall fell silent. I didn't know if I was among the people he spoke of, but my heart beat as if it had heard its name. After the ceremony, I tried to slip out quietly. But before I could, a familiar voice spoke behind me. Leaving without saying goodbye, I turned. Christian stood there, soft golden light on his shoulders. The man before me was no longer the guarded CEO I'd once known, but someone who had weathered the storm and learned how to smile afterward. I thought you'd be busy entertaining essential guests. No one here is more important than the person who made me show up tonight. I laughed softly. You still say things that make it impossible to answer. Then don't, he said gently. Just stay. That night, we walked through Bryant Park. The city glowed, and the summer wind brushed against our skin. He spoke of Italy, of the children he taught to take photos of Kenya's red earth villages, and of the night he realized that if you can't change your past, you can at least live so it no longer needs to be repaired. I listened, and something inside me loosened. Do you ever miss Florence? I asked. I do, he said, eyes softened. But I don't miss the city. I miss the woman sitting across from me, holding her cup of coffee. You still haven't lost the habit of saying things people could misinterpret. Not a misinterpretation, Helen. His smile gentle, just truth. A violin played from the far corner of the park. The air turned still, and for the first time, I saw him not as a man surviving, but as one finally living. A month later, Christian came back to Boston. Quietly, no press, no cameras, he sent me a message. If you're free tonight, come to the river. There's something I want to show you. That evening, the sky was impossibly clear. When I reached the Charles River dock, the sunset spilled gold across the water. Christian stood there, camera in hand, shirt sleeves rolled up. Retaking pictures, I asked. Yeah, I'm learning to keep moments that don't need to prove anything to remember them. He lifted his camera and took a shot of me. I laughed, half covering my face. You know I hate being photographed. I know, he said, smiling. But I want this one to remind me that some people don't have to be beside you daily. Sometimes just knowing they're smiling is enough to bring you peace. I stepped closer. You still say things that make people believe you. And you, he said, still have eyes that make people want to. The last rays of sunlight wrapped around us. There was no wind, no pasternly still water smooth as glass reflecting two faint recognizable silhouettes. When night fell, we sat together in silence. Maybe love isn't about starting anew, but returning to where we were always meant to be faith. Christian turned to me, his voice as soft as the whisper of water. Helen, if you hadn't knocked on the wrong door that day, I'd probably still be running for myself. Thank you for walking into the wrong house so I could find the right person. I laughed, eyes stinging. And thank you for opening the door, not knowing who was there. He reached out, took my hand. The bridge lights shimmered on our skin, gentle as breath. No promises, no forever, just presence, honesty, and warmth. A year later, Horizon Children Foundation opened its first Boston branch. I led the community health program. Christian still traveled, working across continents. Yet every time he returned, we'd meet at that same riverside, where the first sunset had tied two unconnected lives together. Ava was older now, learning piano. She once told me Mr. Christian says, every time I hit the wrong note, it's like life keep playing Don't Stop. I smiled when I heard that. Perhaps it was the truest thing he'd ever taught both of us. Sometimes at dawn, I see him taking photos from our porch, sunlight spilling through his hair, turning it to honey. He turns, smiles, and says in that warm, familiar voice, here's your sunrise. I'm keeping it for you. And I know, after all the storms, all the distances, and all the silent years, what remains isn't debt or loss, but faith. No matter how the world changes, true love always finds its way back. The end, if you've ever lived through days when faith seemed gone, remembered. Dawn is never late. No matter how lost you feel, the light will wait at the end of the road just, as Helen and Christian found each other again among the 1,000 things they once thought were lost. Believe in new beginnings. Because sometimes through the wrong door, we walk into the most genuine love of our lives. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Every comment is a spark that helps future stories come alive and reach more hearts.